we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to U.S. Gay. I'm Andy Humm. That's the new name of the
It's covered up by the Chiron. Hold it up higher.
Okay, there we go.
I'm Ann Northrop. I am back from vacation just in time for us to do an entire show on the marriage decision, which everybody is just freaking out about. And we're very happy to be here with you to do a full hour on the Supreme Court of the United States declaring marriage equality for the entire United States. In fact, let's show you the moment at the Supreme Court, the crowd outside reacting when they first heard what the verdict, the 5-4 verdict was. So
it was just, that's very moving to watch that.
Well, it was crazy. And then we thought that was big enough, but then the entire country and world started to react. And here, for instance, are the newspaper headlines on a select number of newspapers that hit immediately. Just everywhere, all over the country, people were making this the entire front page story. It was fascinating because we, of course, have been following this for years.
Decades.
So we wonder where everyone else was in figuring this out. But I guess this was a landmark decision because all the newspapers are telling us that. And as if that was not enough, let's switch over to the rainbow images that were then produced by the magnificent technology of LED lights all over the country and around the world. Let's see, where is that? Was that there's Disneyland,
or maybe Disney World? Who knows?
Yeah, one of the two.
Oh.
Empire State Building here in New York.
Empire State was there from the beginning.
That's a big bridge. That's Minneapolis. That's the big bridge in Minneapolis. Niagara Falls, for heaven's sakes, was turned into a rainbow. Playhouse Square, I do know where that was, but I've forgotten. Just build it. People just went crazy with these rainbows everywhere.
Including at the White House.
Coming up any minute. We're going to get to that. But it is astonishing that this became a worldwide phenomenon. It wasn't just our community. There's the new World Trade Center, spire lit as a rainbow, and there is the White House.
And the president said he thought it was pretty cool. He wish he could have gone out and watched it, but he didn't want to clear the crowds from in front of the White House with the Secret Service.
Yes, so let's welcome our guests.
We welcome our guests. We're so proud to have you all. Evan Wolfson from Freedom to Marry. You've been writing about this since the mid-20th century.
I thought you were going to say the mid-20s.
Joan Gibbs,
my mid-20s.
Formerly of the Center for Constitutional Rights, a constitutional and civil rights lawyer, long time
activist. Joan and I have known each other since ACT UP days, where she's been working on these issues for many, many, many years.
And James Esseks, the director of the LGBT and AIDS Project of the American Civil Liberties Union. Congratulations to you all.
Thank you.
And to all of us, yeah.
All of us.
So let's get a quick reaction from each of you to this decision. Evan?
Well, I was in my conference room with my team, the Freedom to Marry team, and I have these digital whiz kids and our cutting edge, everybody on their device and so on, but I actually was the one who spotted it first, and I announced it because I was eager to be the first, but then I was like, oh my God, we better make sure, and took a nanosecond to make sure. And then, of course, we all erupted. We actually had prepared. We had little champagne. We did our toast. And then everybody hit their battle stations and started, blasting and tweeting and guiding and so on. And I went back to my office because I figured I needed to read the decision to be able to answer questions and so on. And those who know me may be surprised, but I found myself crying. I just was scrolling through the decision, and each paragraph would trigger a memory of a conversation or a battle or the pioneers in the movement whom I've been talking to a lot in the last several months as we're nearing what we were hoping for this moment. And it was just so profoundly moving. And I realized afterwards it's partly the moving and partly it was relief. You know, obviously
Yes.
I've been carrying this a long time and
More than 30
pushing,
years.
you know, optimism, and I was always the one, to people's sometimes
Yes.
annoyance, that no, this is what we're going to win, we're going to win, and I always believed we were going to win, and I also believed that if we didn't win this time, we would keep working our strategy and would win. But God, I was happy not to have to do that, and the relief of we are here, we won, really overcame me, and I've been happy ever since.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Joan?
Well, you know, I was one of those people who in the beginning did not feel that this was the issue that we should be pressing. And never really got involved in the marriage equality movement because I was involved in other issues which I felt were more pressing. Nevertheless, that said, I changed my opinion so that I was in California when the Proposition 8 decision came down and was following the reactions. I went to the demonstrations. And so I realized, I said, did you know, I guess the, I mean, just the lesbian in me said, well, you know, the way they're attacking them, you know, this is outrageous. How dare you attack somebody just for simply wanting to get married, you know? So, congratulations, Ed.
Well, thank you to all of us.
Now, and how I felt about it, you know, I wasn't surprised because, you know, the Constitution litigation is the thing I focused in for all of my career. I mean, in light of loving and all those decisions,
Right.
I mean, I wasn't surprised. I mean, I thought that, you know, that you would win, but I thought it might be 6, though. But it wasn't.
Now you're getting greedy.
No. And as to the decision itself, I hope we get into it.
Yes.
I thought that Justice Kennedy, I don't know, I think I would have loved him to have stuck more closely to the Equal Protection Clause, because, you know, then it would be like, you know, after Brown versus Board of Education, you know, the Supreme Court in a series of procuring decisions, like liquidated all of the Jim Crow laws. I mean, it took the movement to make it real, but they did. So that's what I was thinking
I think
about.
he gave us plenty to work with. I'm
I
sure
hope-
we'll
I
talk
hope,
about
yeah.
that.
We will. We'll get
Yes.
into that.
Yeah.
James.
You were there at the
So I was in the courtroom.
Oh.
We were counsel in the Kentucky and the Ohio cases, and so I had waited actually in line a whole series of days to hear them issue decisions.
Oh,
in
you
other
had to
cases.
sit there and listen to the Obamacare decision.
I listened to the Obamacare decision. I listened to a decision about raisins. It was fascinating. But then on Friday, I and a bunch of people had a sense that it was likely that then, and if it hadn't been then, there was only one day left. But so you file in, you sit down, they tell you can't talk or make any noise or react or anything, and then the justices file in, and the chief says right off the bat, Justice Kennedy has her opinion in number 14-556, Obergefell versus Hodges, and I'm like, here it comes. And obviously, Kennedy being the author is a very good sign, but not a definite sign. And so what happens in the courtroom is they read an excerpt from the opinion, a summary. And some of the justices start out reading, and they tell you what how it comes out. Kennedy just starts with the facts, like these are the plaintiffs, and this is their claim, and this is what happened in the lower courts, and we're like, we know that, we know that, we got it. But after a while, it may be like 6, 7 sentences in, he says something, and I forget what it was, that made clear to me and to everybody in the room that the majority ruling was going to go our way, and there was absolute collective relief and lots of tears. Lots of tears. I was crying. The guy sitting next to me was bawling. And because it was, it's the culmination of decades of work. It's so much bound up in our individual worth, and to have the Supreme Court and the country thereby say, you're part of the American family. Welcome. We respect you is an amazing thing.
And as you know, I can be highly critical of the United States of America on this show and others. But when the gay men's chorus started singing the Star Spangled Banner on the steps of the Supreme Court right afterwards, some tears came down my face as well. It was very emotional. You know, and we deal with these issues all the time. We talk about them all the time. But that was an emotional moment.
I was on a golf course in Scotland, and I got emotional 2 years ago at the Windsor decision and at all the intermediary federal court decisions, which really moved me. So this, to me, was a little less emotional, but I was away.
You
so.
just assumed that you're like, it's coming.
And I was focused on those pigs on the dissenting side. And did they read their opinions or announce them from the bench?
So one of them did. Chief Justice Roberts read his dissent, and so as I understand,
the "Who do we think we are" dissent.
The "Who do we think we are" dissent.
Oh,
and that actually is significant because the tradition, as I understand it in the Supreme Court, is the justice who writes the opinion reads a summary of his or her opinion, and the dissents are often filed. But it's kind of rare that a justice will read a dissent from the bench, and he or she has to feel pretty strongly about it to do that. And so this was the first oral dissent by Chief Justice Roberts in 10 years, in the 10 years that he's been on the bench. So this is a guy that there was a lot of speculation about, oh, maybe he's going to come with us because of the stature of the court. Oh, was that wrong? Just wrong.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of feeling behind his words in the courtroom. And then Justice Kennedy had already announced that there were 4 separate dissents, and it wasn't clear whether we were going to be treated to oral dissents from all 4 of them. And I actually expected Scalia to read a dissent, but he didn't.
God knows what would have happened if he did.
Can we go back to the decision that we won first and talk about the words?
Sure,
that were in
go
it?
ahead.
Well, no, I want to hear what the legal grounds were and how you feel about them and how that affects us all going forward on marriage, on any other relational issues, all that. What did we win?
We won big. We won a huge ruling that obviously affirms the freedom to marry, big in and of itself. But Justice Kennedy took the liberty argument, the freedom to marry argument, and the equality argument that gay people must be included, and he wove them together, as he often does, and talked about, he essentially said, I don't see these two as different takes and completely going in different directions, as a lot of academics like to think of it as being. I see them as core constitutional values that, like a double helix of power, moves us forward. And that was the argument he made. He talked about this as resonating in and drawing from liberty and equality. And he affirmed very powerfully the importance of marriage, and he talked a lot about the values and principles and legal ramifications of marriage. He talked about the importance of including gay people and ending the demeaning, ending the exclusion of gay people. And to me, that really signals and gives us a lot to work with in saying to other courts and decision makers that the day of the gay exception in the law, the day of gays are different and excluded, has to come to an end. And I think this decision gives us a lot to work with as we go forward in making that case beyond this huge achievement of winning marriage. And the one other thing he did that I found very, very meaningful was he went out of his way to say, this is not a new discussion. This didn't just happen. This isn't being sprung on the American people. There has been a debate, he said. There has been a conversation. There have been votes and battles and legislative grapplings and much, much discussion. And that is an important part of our history, but it's also important because it affirmed the legitimacy of the courts doing the right thing, as this court powerfully did.
I have always thought that, while marriage was not necessarily my issue personally, that it was the vehicle to get to equality, to then interpret us in all laws and situations as having equal standing as human beings in this country, at least. Has it accomplished that? Is that where we're headed with
Well,
this?
I'm obviously interested to hear what my friends have to say, but my answer is yes, and we should make it accomplish that. Spin up, lift up, don't trivialize. And unfortunately, too many academics and pundits and others like to say, but he didn't say this magic word, or he didn't do this, or whatever. I think we ought to look at this decision and see the power of the argument for liberty, equality, and inclusion as sending a strong signal, affirming the dignity of gay people as a way of saying you cannot take these people and treat them differently, which is an equality argument. And then people like to get into, well, he didn't use the words heightened scrutiny or the other kinds of typical things we learned in law school decades ago. Well, you know what? This is what heightened scrutiny looks like. This is meaningful review that rejects and is skeptical of bogus distinctions and isolating of people and says the government must have a real reason, and by the way, this reason isn't good enough. And he has now done that in 4 major gay rights decisions. This is heightened scrutiny. This is equal protection. It's the command of the Constitution, and we, meaning lawyers like James, need to go out and use it that way.
Robbie Kaplan said it was a home run, who was your co-counsel on Windsor.
In the DOMA case, yeah.
Tobias Barrington Wolf at the University of Pennsylvania said it's the most consequential ruling on equal protection and fundamental liberty in decades.
Good.
Do you buy that?
Well, yeah, I sort of buy it. I mean, I want to, you know, I come at this issue as like through the prism of the history of black people and their struggle for racial justice, which is of course ongoing. So when I read the decision, you know, you know, knowing all the cases they were talking about so intimately, like Levin versus Virginia, which by the way was the last case decided by the Supreme Court having to do the last Jim Crow law that was broken down, which I thought about that because I thought, oh, well, it got there. Sort of a reversal of what happened.
And I can talk about why I think that is. But,
right.
but
I want you to talk about how you think that is. And so I think this decision can and should be used to press for equality, not only for LGBT people, but for everybody, you know, because that's what I want to see happen, for everybody to have equality. But we have to see, and I want to note that the Supreme Court this week, I think it was, in the independent redistricting decision, which I thought was sort of weird, that when they upheld it, they talked about how the voters had voted. Did you notice that on that referendum? And I thought, oh, well then on Friday they said, because the voters had voted in some of those
but there are some things we put up to a vote, and there are other things we don't put up to a vote.
Right, and that's exactly, I hope, the court, because I know the right's going to seize on that and they're going to start back again. That's okay.
James?
We can fight.
So, look, I agree with the assertions that Tobias and Evan have made, that this is a home run, that this is a big win, regardless of the details of the doctrine in the decision. We know by now that Justice Kennedy is a guy who sees the protections in the Constitution through liberty and equality in his own way. And he's never written an opinion, at least in our area, that walks through the doctrine as it has been interpreted a lot in the past. This is actually more clear than many earlier decisions because it couldn't be clearer about there being a fundamental right to marry that covers same-sex couples. The equality part of the decision is not as doctrinally specific as it might be. It's very clear that unequal access to a fundamental right gets you heightened scrutiny, and that is what he applied here. But I also think that it's not going to be hard for federal appeals courts, the level down from the Supreme Court, to continue the evolution on the equal protection side of things towards more rulings that heightened scrutiny applies when the government discriminates against gay people. Because each of the factors that the courts look at when deciding whether discrimination by the government should be considered suspect are in the decision. He makes it clear that there's a history of discrimination against gay people. Certainly this court, the majority, doesn't think otherwise. He says twice that sexual orientation is immutable. He makes clear that being gay or straight doesn't tell anybody anything about their ability to participate in society. He talks about the fact that homosexuality used to be considered a mental disorder and hasn't been considered that since the 70s. And he says the relative political power of gay people is irrelevant. Those are the 4 factors that courts have looked at. This is not going to be hard.
Do you think he's making up?
I'm just going to say, those are huge, huge things that have now been installed into the law.
Exactly.
That people need to focus on.
And I really have to say to my colleagues in the academy, take this
Yes.
and lift it up and stop trashing the things we win. I mean, this is powerful in exactly the detailed way James said it, and in the gestalt way that really will resonate with the country if we allow it to resonate.
Well,
but
then-
I think it is
Yeah.
resonating. I think
I
that,
do.
you know,
Oh,
I
hugely,
mean,
hugely.
there will be quibblers and people focused on the details of the analysis, but big picture, those
Absolutely.
front page headlines, the reality of marriage in our lives in all 50 states, that is having an incredible
That's
impact.
exactly right.
And the backlash or resistance seems to me almost negligible. No, to this particular ruling.
In terms of
Not in terms of the right wing still being. Joan's looking at me like I've lost my mind. We'll get to the whole religion thing and everything, but just in terms of the implementation of this particular
And I think
ruling.
that's right. I mean, I think that, look, the implementation is going very well. There have been a few pockets of resistance. They are mostly melting away. And that shouldn't really be a surprise because, you know, prior to Friday, we had 36 states that were issuing marriage licenses to same-sex couples. And they included some very conservative places, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Utah. We didn't have any problems in those places. So it stands to reason that we're not going to have problems in other places as well. And the few places where there was something, you know, by now, not even a week out, almost all of them are gone.
Now, we
Well,
should
I
say.
just want to say something, you know, because a lot of people were making, you know, really focused on the people who were resisting, but, you know, really, you know, and Evan, you know, that the Supreme Court's mandates don't really issue until 25 days after the decision is issued. So I think that we should wait and see whether they follow what the mandate has issued, and it really is then the law of the land, and whether they will follow, or whether they will go down the road of the Southerners who resisted Brown and all those decisions. I mean, they could. Some of them could go down that road and start, you know. I mean, I saw people saying, oh, we're going to stop issuing marriage licenses altogether. I don't think that's better. But they're going to, you know, people are making these damn pronouncements. So I think we're going to have to just see how things rolls out in the next couple of days.
Well, look, I do think we have to see how things roll out, but I think two things. One is I think they are rolling out really well.
Okay.
And the other thing is, you're right that the Supreme Court decision isn't final until after a 25-day period of time when one of the states could come in and ask for reconsideration.
Right.
I don't see any of the states coming in to ask for reconsideration because they have all four of the states that are in the case are issuing marriage licenses.
Right.
Okay.
And their leaders
They're
have,
not waiting
have
even the
instructed.
25 days.
I know, I saw
A couple of states tried to invoke the 25-day to delay
For a day.
Alabama
Right.
and Louisiana. They caved immediately.
And they caved because that's a question of, is there an order coming down from the Supreme Court that is going to, you know, issue an injunction, make live an injunction against a state? It's not a question of what the law is.
Right.
The law right now is that same-sex couples have the freedom to marry in all 50 states, and nobody needs to wait for anything more.
And I just want to give one quick shout out to the legal groups, the ACLU, Lambda Legal, Gay and Lesbian Advocates and Defenders, and National Center for Lesbian Rights, who did huge amounts of prep work in advance of this decision over the last several weeks, working with Freedom to Marry and a handful of others, and we in turn were working, as were they, with state groups to be ready for this implementation. And there were a lot of meetings with some of the state officials in many of these states to prep them and so on. And these guys were ready if we needed to spring into action and if we needed to deal with some kind of serious acting out. These groups have been ready, and we're all working together and monitoring it. There's been a lot of work that's gone into this, but we also all believe that basically the public officials were going to follow the law, it was going to be faithfully implemented, and sure enough, that is what is happening.
And you have put together a marriage facts.
Yeah.
MarriageEqualityFacts.org.
This is what people need to look at. If they have any questions about the decision,
MarriageEqualityFacts.org.
And I see that Lambda, which has also been involved in these cases, has a marriage tracker, which is you got anybody gives you any trouble?
Freedom to Marry also.
Give us a call. You all have this? Yes?
Yes, so basically, if anybody out there is encountering a problem with getting a marriage license or anything related to having the marriage respected, they should get in contact with any of the legal groups that Evan mentioned, with Freedom to Marry, with a local state LGBT advocacy organization, because we're connected and we will help you out.
All right, can I talk about the dissents and opposition now?
Well, you know, if you want to give them some airtime.
Go ahead and rain on the parade.
Go ahead.
Right.
Go ahead.
No, I want to rain on their
Sure,
parade.
sure. No, go ahead.
Because I was appalled at the language they used. When Scalia is talking about having to put a bag over his head if
Please.
he, yes, be my guest. And Roberts, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, is saying, who do we think we are? Well, I think you're the Supreme Court deciding on equal protection questions. I think they should all be tried for treason. I am appalled at these people making statements like this. And on a more serious note, they raise this specter of attacks on Christianity, and the whole thread now is about protecting religious liberty. And the ACLU is now suing Bobby Jindal for the order he issued on May 19th about the whatever it is,
Religious freedom.
marriage and
Religious
conscience order.
Carve-outs.
Yeah. So
And Texas.
I suspect we'll be litigating or legislating this for a long time, but what do you see ahead on this?
Well, first off, just on the religious liberty piece of the dissents, there is some concern, especially in Justice Alito's dissent about religious liberty. What I think is really important here is that there is a mention in the majority opinion by Justice Kennedy of religious liberty, and he says, look, the First Amendment protects people's rights to believe and to act on those beliefs, and that's fine. But he doesn't go so far as to suggest that people would get an exemption or a carve-out from the marriage laws based on religious liberty. Now, of course, no cleric anywhere in the country is ever going to be forced by the government to perform a marriage that he or she thinks is against his religion. In spite
of all the lies being told by
Right.
Republican
Yes.
presidential candidates.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
it's not going to happen.
I guess the issue, though, I think this highlights just this concern, the need for broader federal legislation, in particular, on the order of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Act concerning public accommodations. I mean, you're right. You know, no minister is ever going to be forced. But the question becomes like the public accommodation issues, right? You're selling flowers. You know, do you have to sell flowers to a lesbian gay couple? And as we saw from Hobby Lobby, that's where I think the real tensions and the battle is going to be. Personally, I mean, I was once, I can't remember this case in law school, but I loved it because my professor who was gay, a constitutional lawyer who was gay, and, you know, and he talked about one of the civil rights cases in which I don't know whether he made this up, but that they were talking about the public accommodation stuff, and they asked them, you know, well, where did you get your ketchup from or mustard? And he said, okay, you got it from outside state, so it involves the Commerce Clause, you know, and you're going to have to abide by the public accommodation stuff. So I think it's going to be those type of questions are the ones that concern me, because I really think that we have to say, no, you have to abide by. If you're in a public accommodation, you got your business open for the public, then you have to serve everybody who comes in there. I don't think we should relent on that question.
No, and look, and I totally agree with that, and I don't think that we are relenting. I think that in the immediate wake of Obergefell, I think we are seeing claims for exemptions in two primary contexts. One is the context you're talking about, where businesses say, well, we operate our business according to Christian or some other religious principles, and we don't want to have to provide services to gay people, especially connected to weddings. And the other context is government officials who want an exemption to say that they don't have to do their job. They don't have to serve everybody who comes up to the window based on their own religious
Well, the
beliefs.
Attorney General of Texas says they don't. And then they discovered a 1983 ruling from the Attorney General of Texas that said in interracial marriages, you do. You know, because somebody asked for a religious exemption for forming interracial marriages.
Well, but that underscores what I think is a really important point here, which is that the effort to subvert civil rights advances that is made after people fail to stop them takes the form often of these claims for carve-outs, usually wrapped in the disguise of religious freedom. This is not a new tactic. This is part of the typical pattern we see every time the country takes a step forward, and it happened in the 80s. That in the case in the opinion you're referencing, it was certainly happening in the 60s during the civil rights struggles and the passage of civil rights law. And we absolutely have to combat it, as we have been combating these efforts to subvert the gains we're making under the guise of religious freedom. Fortunately, the American people have heard this song before,
Right.
and if reminded and engaged and helped to understand it, we can beat them back on many of these battles, which are a predictable flurry that we see every time the country takes a step forward. It's a very important line that we have to hold and we have to invest in, but I also think it's really important that we not let the tail wag the dog. That's part of the struggle that happens after a major step forward. It's not the major story. The major story is this giant step forward, and we have to harness the power of that, because, you know, we've won the freedom to marry as a matter of law. But the conversation in this powerful vocabulary and in this engine of transformation that we've seen move so much of the country has now only just arrived in parts of the country where we really need to have that conversation, where we need to lift people up and give them the visibility of couples getting married and the values of love and fairness that other parts of the country have had the discussion, but we haven't had as much in Texas and in Alabama and many of the other places. And we shouldn't step on our own message, nor should we pivot away from it or put it on a shelf as something done. We have just begun to use this very resonant engine of change in places where we still need to continue to change.
Let me ask you about that, because that has been your consistent line for many years now, and I think it's paid off. Yeah, I'll resist the temptation to dissect it, but it is, of course, absolutely right. You are absolutely right that we had to win the hearts and minds to support this, and it's why we aren't seeing rebellion in the streets, and it's why we do have majority support in this country, and why when these fools go out and claim that you know, the American people don't support this. Have you read the newspapers lately? But what occurred to me as I was thinking about this show and talking to you was to ask you how we did that. You know, you have said over and over and over and over again, we have to win the hearts and minds, we have to have these conversations, and we're aware that people have come out and people have talked to their families, but really this has been such a huge thing. How did we do it? How do we do it going forward?
Well, you alluded to what I think of as the chief engine of change, which is conversation. People telling their stories, people coming out, people talking about why marriage matters in millions of conversations across more than 4 decades. I mean, as you know, we've been fighting for this since really the immediate aftermath of Stonewall.
Since 1970.
Even before.
Yeah, well, of course, but the cases began in the very early 70s. The ACLU actually brought the first case in Minnesota, and there were a few others in that period. And we reached the Supreme Court with that first marriage case in 1972, and the court, like all the other courts at that time, rubber stamped it away. They didn't even bother to write an opinion. I don't even think they bothered to write a sentence. I think it was a phrase where they threw it out, and that ruling against us in that first wave of litigation was overturned on Friday. So this conversation has been going on for a very long time. But the other thing I'll just say, in addition to that general key point about conversation and stories and coming out and engaging non-gay people and inviting them to tell their stories, like President Obama did and so on, is that we have to remember we did this through the power of a movement, millions of conversations, many organizations, many years and so on. But the movement wasn't just a random series of actions. There was a strategy. And a core group of organizations broadening out to others drove a strategy that talked about how we would win, building a critical mass of states and a critical mass of support to allow litigation to succeed in the Supreme Court. And then Freedom to Marry was created as a campaign to drive that strategy and to support the work and help the work and round out the work of key legal groups and others who were doing the work. It wasn't just random, it wasn't just grassroots, it wasn't just conversations, though it required all of those things. It was also investing in a strategy and investing in a campaign. That was the recipe for success.
But it occurs to me also, though, that marriage is overpowered the fear of coming out. because you have to come out to get married. You got to go down to the bureau and sign your name on a document. So even Jim Neighbors, who'd spent his whole life in the closet, wanted to get married.
Right.
So he did. That's how he came out. And a lot of other celebrities and a lot of other people all across the country.
Because
this was their coming out.
Because the reason that I was so committed to working on marriage was because I saw it as this common vocabulary of love and commitment. And remember, the central thing we are discriminated against as gay people, not the only thing, but the central thing is our love.
Who we love.
And our love and our loving relationship. And marriage is the preeminent, not the only, but the preeminent vocabulary of marriage. And it is the language that non-gay people speak when they talk about love. So by claiming that vocabulary,
Less and less.
we were able to give, you know, that's simply not true. It's actually more and more because people remarry.
Okay. Let me get back to a legal question for a minute, James. It is a hideous thought, but not impossible, that the Republicans will elect a president in 2016 who could be in a position to put someone on the Supreme Court who will switch the balance here. Is this a decision that could be overturned or reversed? Or
Well, you know, theoretically, yes. Practically, no. I don't think that's going to happen. You know, some justice is going to retire in the next couple of years. The next president will appoint somebody, and if it's like the 4 dissenters, that is not a good thing for us. But I think that what's happening is marriage is a reality in America today. It's been a reality in a bunch of states for a long time. And I think that the Republican Party is moving on from this. I think that the leaders of the Republican Party feel like this is not helping them with broaden their base, broaden the demographics of their party, and the polling among young people, people 30 and under, in both parties, for everybody, is just overwhelmingly supportive of us. I don't think that they're going to bother to pick that fight.
it would be ironic and fascinating if the issue which got George Bush elected in 2004 by everyone being against us was in fact what got the Republicans defeated in 2016.
But that's actually what they're, I think, worried about. I think that...
Well, not the candidates themselves at the moment.
Not the candidates
Actually, I don't fully agree with that either. I think the candidates all did their little ritualistic pandering to the isolated and shrinking base that prevails in their primary, and they will move on. The candidates who are not serious, Ted Cruz and the likes of them, they'll run on this because they're not really running for president. They're running for this cycle within this base and the money that comes from having prominence with this, which bashing gays serves. But that's not where any serious candidate is today.
But the question is the kind of judge that they would pick for the Supreme Court.
Oh, you're absolutely right about that. Look, the stakes in who's elected president, for many reasons, but certainly with regard to the courts and the Supreme Court, are enormous. And it's not just one justice. We very well may see several justices take new seats in the Supreme Court. But I totally agree with James. Troubling and of concern as that is for a whole host of other reasons, including voting rights. I mean, you go right down the list. All the other things we all care about. The freedom to marry is not going away. Freedom to marry is here to stay. We've won it.
Joan,
Yes.
I watched President Obama's speech or statement in the Rose Garden about the marriage decision, which he gave as he was about to go to Charleston to speak at the service there. And while I thought what he said was, of course, wonderful and supportive, I caught him as being a little subdued about it, given where he was headed. And I had some of the same sense that much as I, think this is fantastic, that it happens in the context of a lot of horror going on in this country. Black churches burning, even as we speak. Everything that's happened with the police and the black population, and certainly the massacre in that church. And I wonder how all this resonates to someone who's been deeply involved in civil rights work more broadly.
Well, I thought it was it was a big coincidence that that decision was handed down on the day he had to go to Charleston. I watched the speech in the Rose Garden too, and then thereafter listened to his eulogy in Charleston, both of which I thought were very well done. And I think to me, how it resonates, you know, I had a friend who, when Obama, before his reelection, I guess you know, he just almost months before the reelection came out for marriage equality.
To the then closeted Robert Roberts.
Right. This friend of mine, who shall remain nameless, who is a lesbian, called me up crying because she thought he was going to lose the election. And I said, wait a minute. Well, he's going to lose the election? I said, listen, okay, if he loses the election, he's been honest.
Finally.
Finally. So, I mean, you're not worried. I said, no, I'm not worried. I don't think the black community is that homophobic that they're going to not vote for him and vote for Mitt Romney because of this. I mean, I think, but...
And to the contrary, it was an enormous permission giver
right.
that it helped move.
Plus, he needed something to get his base excited so that they would campaign for him.
Right.
And this is the issue that he picked to get people excited about him again. Because, you know, people had some mixed feelings about some other things. I think it was a total home run for him.
That's right. That's exactly right. And we certainly made that case to him. And but to his credit, he also got a lot of pressure and a lot of encouragement, including from some gay activist organizations, to say wait until after the election for exactly what Joan's talking about. And others of us were saying no, do the right thing because it's the right thing and because it's the right thing politically. And fortunately he did. He didn't run away from it. He ran on it.
But it got Andrew Cuomo reelected in New York.
It certainly did.
Who was otherwise can be very conservative, but he did
I'd
the
say
marriage
God
thing.
help us all, but that would be another cynical remark on my part. We are evidently the 20th country in the world to legalize same-sex marriage, approximately.
Yeah, that's fine.
We actually got it before Ireland because it hasn't gone into effect there.
But after Pitcairn Island or whatever.
Exactly.
Population 48.
But, you know, I'm a little reluctant to wave the American flag, but as Andy was going to do. And the State Department's annual human rights report came out last week, I think, and talked about the good and bad around the world, including in the United States. And I wonder where you see all this fitting in internationally and what effect it will have and all of that.
One of the two calls that moved me most on the day we won was a call from Vice President Biden, who I interned for back in my hair days in college. And he couldn't have been warmer and more proud. And in fact, he was so eager. He actually had left a message on my voicemail, and I hadn't realized he was calling, which unfortunately I still haven't. And then he called back to say. But the reason I bring it up is because what he said was, in addition to the congratulations and the happiness, was he thanked us for getting the United States where it needs to be on this question so that the United States in turn can be the leader it needs to be in talking about human rights and having the resonance and the leadership around the world when so many other things in so many other places are going the wrong way. That we need our country to be where it needs to be in order to be a moral force for good and to be able to speak up for human rights. And we all know there are many imperfections and questions. But you have to also recognize the good. This was the United States getting where it needed to be on an important question, and with Russia and the thuggery and evil we see there, and in several of the African countries and several of the Arab countries, the Muslim countries, and abuses of human rights for gay people and also for women and so on. It was important and is important to get Ireland and the United States and the other countries who have a commitment to the rule of law and democracy and pluralism and respect for rights and respect for women and respect for gay people to be out there saying it. And he acknowledged that was an important achievement here.
And doing it through a process that
of law
makes sense.
Well, I think I just hope that the United States, which is allied to many of the countries in which LGBT people are most oppressed, which is amongst their strongest allies. For example, Nigeria, which we get a lot of our oil from, that they will carry this message, because heretofore, they really haven't. Well, I mean,
I think it's a little more complicated.
Yeah, it's complicated, but
I mean, President Obama did. He he went to Africa, and in
Well,
several
he
of the
went to
countries he
Africa.
spoke there. He hasn't been
But
to Nigeria, but
He's the Saudi Arabia
yes, well, I agree.
has to be, but by any measure, one of the most oppressive places
Correct.
for women in the world.
You're absolutely right.
And LGBT people too. This is
Intolerable.
United States is one. So I hope that this is just not, and I'm happy. I mean, but I do think that we have to really make sure to ensure this does, and we will see, because when the General Assembly of the UN begins in September, as it usually does, somebody may bring this issue up, and we'll see how the U.S. votes.
Yes, the Pope will bring it up.
Yes, because he's coming
Not
in
in a good
September.
way.
Yes, he's coming in September to speak at the UN, so we'll see.
I'll be protesting.
You'll be all right. We'll be protesting.
Well, I mean, people shouldn't have any illusions that a lot of these religions, they've softened their tone in many cases. Even the Protestant fundamentalists, that was a big article in the Times about that, softening their tone. So that's all good, because that's the first step towards changing. But what's on your agenda now? ACLU, James Esseks?
Well, so look, I think there's a lot of work to do. The first among equals is getting non-discrimination protections for LGBT people nationwide, basic civil rights protections in employment, housing, public accommodations, education. And as I think many folks know, we don't have those protections at the federal level. And a clear
Except for contractors.
Well, for federal contractors,
25% of the
yes,
employers in the country.
very important, but we need more than that.
Well, the bill's about to be introduced. We're not under any illusions about it, but I'd like to think Republicans would, of course, get behind this.
Well, and we're hoping. So the bill that's being put together is a comprehensive LGBT civil rights bill at the national level that would cover all those contexts and would add, I think what we need is add sexual orientation and gender identity into the existing civil rights acts.
And do you think that's going to fly? Because that's been a very controversial strategy. For a long time, we thought, civil rights groups did not want to open up the Civil Rights Act. We would have to do a standalone bill. Now it seems to be going the other way.
Well, look, I'm hopeful that we're going to get to a place where there's a consensus in the civil rights community that not only that LGBT civil rights protections need to happen, but they need to happen through the mechanism of adding us into the existing acts. And the primary reason that we need that is that that's the clearest way to fight against religious exemptions in the bills. Because there are no exemptions for people of faith from the existing bans on sex discrimination or race discrimination, et cetera. And actually with the exception of Title IX, which is a problem. But the problem we've had in ENDA specifically is that people want to say, okay, well, you need an exemption for a wide range of people from the non-discrimination protections, and it's entirely crystal clear, if you add us into the Civil Rights Act, that we would be treated differently. And
If you don't add us.
If you don't.
well, yes, if you add us into the Civil Rights Act, and you treat us the same way as everybody else who's protected by the Civil Rights Act, there's no exemption.
Right.
And so if we added in an exemption that was just about us, I think it's very clear that that's not equal treatment.
And I'm sorry, and I understand they want to expand sex protections in this bill, possibly.
Yeah, the idea is to add sex protections against sex discrimination in the context of public accommodations, because the federal public accommodations law doesn't currently cover sex, and also to add sex into the ban on discrimination in public funding.
And we'd like to educate our viewers that you're already covered under sex discrimination by the EEOC if you're transgender, right?
Yes.
And some sexual orientation cases.
Yes. So look, our position, and it's backed up by some case law, actually a growing amount of case law, is that the existing bans in federal law on sex discrimination cover sexual orientation and gender identity discrimination. And there's, but we also think that while that's true, and so and the court should recognize existing protections for LGBT people in all the different contexts, we also really need explicit protections, statutes that make it clear to LGBT people and to employers and landlords and business owners just what the scope of their obligations are.
And
Can I just add some? And I would, to what you said, I think that also I would like to see people, some of the resource return to the focus on AIDS. And that's because, the AIDS epidemic is not as in the epidemic proportions as it was, but as from my understanding, according to my friends at ACT UP, who still exist, it's really young people, and particularly young Black and Latino people. So I would like to see some money and resources and time and energies devoted to that, as well as the problem of homelessness and lack of affordable housing, particularly here in New York City. I mean, and these are issues that are not unique to LGBT people, but they're actually working on them. We can get in coalitions with other groups, which I think we should do, and not just focus on all the issues that really just affect us. And I guess I wanted to say too, having laws is great, but it's insufficient. And I'm here to tell you, as a Black person, where race discrimination has been prohibited under federal, state, local, Black association rules, right? And look.
Yes.
And it hasn't been enough.
It has been enough.
No,
so we have
no.
to do some. We have to think about strategies,
so
ways, and short of dismantling the system, which is actually what I believe we should do. But we have to focus on that too, because laws alone don't change attitudes. They might make people,
Yes.
temper their behavior, but they don't really in the long run.
Well, look, no, I totally agree with that. And I think, look, what is the goal? What are we all trying to do in the LGBT rights movement? We are trying to change the way America thinks about LGBT people, the way America understands LGBT people and how we're accepted in society. Because if we change that, all of the policy goals that we share, including dealing with issues like homelessness that affect so many different people, they will fall in line, or they will be easier to fix. And so the question is, the advocacy we're doing, we need to keep our eye on the ball is what we're working on actually changing the way America thinks about LGBT people. One of the reasons that I think the marriage work has been so effective is that it has worked as a very incredibly effective way to have a conversation with the country about LGBT people. And I think we need to keep doing that because, look, we are a civil rights movement that is maturing. We are a civil rights movement. We are still finishing the job of getting rid of explicitly anti-LGBT laws.
Government discrimination.
Government discrimination, de jure discrimination. And other civil rights movements, thankfully, got through that part of their evolution a long time ago. As you pointed out, it's not like that fixed everything. It's not like that's the end of the road. It's not the end of the road, and we are not at the end of the road. But I think there's no question that you got to get rid of those explicit laws that discriminate, that de jure discrimination, before you can go and work on the rest of it. And the question, in my mind, and this is something I've discussed with people who do racial justice work and women's rights work and other stuff within the ACLU, is like, okay, here we are a movement that at the moment has the attention of the country. And we have the attention of the country in part because there still are explicit anti-LGBT laws that are, now we're getting rid of a lot of them. But they're like, look, my colleagues say to me, look, you have the attention of the country and you better not squander that because people are going to move on and you have an opportunity to engage with people now and to change their minds again about who we are and how we fit into America. And it will get harder to do that. And so, I raise this because, of course, we have to work towards a world of lived equality. So it's not enough to have it in the statute books or in the case law, right? It's got to be something that's real in people's daily lives. But that is harder work than what we've done so far. It gets harder, it doesn't get easier, as hard as it's been to get here, because that's all about enforcement and culture change. And I think that the marriage stuff has, we will see how our post-government discrimination era unfolds, and I have no illusions that it's going to be super easy, but I think that a bunch of the culture change that we're all witnessing around LGBT people in this country is going to mean that we're not going to have as many problems as we've had in the gender and race contexts. At least that's my hope. And I think it's because of the power of the marriage conversation and the culture change work that we've done in this period.
So
Down to our last minute.
Yeah, well, quickly then, I agree with what both my friends said, and I mentioned that I got 2 calls that really moved me that day, and the first one was Joe Biden, but the second one was from Bernie Cohen. Bernie Cohen was one of the 2 lawyers who argued Loving versus Virginia, and he called me to, of course, congratulate me and thank me and all of that, but what he said was that arguing and winning Loving was the high point of his life, and he's so glad it didn't stop there. And what I think that really signals for all of us is this is a high point, if not the high point, of our lives, and it's important that we not let it stop here.
And you probably had something to do with this, one of the only public acts Mildred Loving took after winning her case so many years ago was to stand up for same-sex marriage before she died.
As did Coretta Scott King.
That's right.
And I hope that we do not squander the opportunity to remember that we are all in this together, and that's the way we need to do it. Thank you, Evan. Thank you, Joan. Thank you, James. And we want to leave our viewers with a little more videotape of an older couple in Dallas. Wait, I got to get this. Jack Evans and George Harris together for 54 years. Getting married on Friday after the Supreme Court decision. Thank you all for being here.
All right, if y'all could hold hands and face each other, please. You all want me to call you Jack and George? Or? We are gathered together to celebrate the rites of matrimony between Jack and George. Marriage is a solemn occasion to be entered into soberly and seriously. Participants should be prepared to pledge without reservation to each other their love, faith, and fidelity. If Jack and George have reservation or condition why they should not be joined in marriage, they should state the reasons. Do you, Jack, wish to go forward to pledge your love to George?
Yes.
Do you, George, wish to go forward to pledge your love to Jack?
Yes.
Jack, will you have George to be your lawful wedded husband? Will you love, honor, and comfort him in sickness and in health until death do you part? George, will you have Jack to be your lawful wedded husband? Will you love, honor, and comfort him in sickness and in health until death do you part?
I do and I will.
Inasmuch as Jack and George have covenanted together in holy wedlock, and have witnessed the same before this company, and have pledged their love and faith to each other by joining hands, by the authority vested in me by the Constitution of the United States, spouses for life.